Welcome to Tales from the Bridge. David Zindell is back on the show. We are super happy to talk to David once again. So Marty and myself sit down and have a great conversation. Check out the show notes for a link to David's work. He's got a new book coming out. Please remember, like the show, rate the show, review us. We want to hear from you. We have a lot of amazing guests coming on the show all the time. We really want to hear from you. Let us know what you think. All right, David is waiting for us. Let's make our way over to the bridge.
We are extremely pleased to once again have a friend of the show, David Zindell, on Tales from the Bridge again today. David was our very first interview a year and a half ago, and he has come back to join us again to talk about his latest book, which is coming out on February 16th, called The Remembrancer's Tale. Now, this is, after 25 years, the first new installation in the Neverness universe. It's been since the end of, so he wrote Neverness in 1988, and that was followed by a trilogy called Requiem for Homo Sapiens throughout the 90s. And then in the 2000s, he wrote a fantasy series called the Ia Cycle. And now, after 25 years, he's back with a new book that continues the tale of Thomas Rain, who was the Lord Remembrancer in Neverness. And we're so pleased to read this. I've just had the privilege of reading an advanced copy, and we're really happy to have you back on the show to talk more about your work, David.
Thanks, Marty. It was a pleasure talking to you the last time, and I can't believe, as you say it, that it's been 25 years, because it doesn't seem that long.
Yeah. Something we'll let our listeners know as well. Our second episode that we did with the show, we all read Neverness, and it's one of those books that was very different than the science fiction we were reading, and it's one of Marty's favorite books, if not, I think, his favorite book, and we all really enjoyed it. So listeners out there, if you want to know more about Neverness, episode 2, we talk about that. And then, of course, I believe episode 6 and 7, we did a 2-part with David because our conversation was so long and we didn't want to cut it because we got to so many interesting things. And I hope we go there again today, talking about writing and some big existential ideas. We definitely want to find out what's going on with the human soul and God and the universe and why everything is the way it is.
That's right. This is why we love you, David. You tackle the big questions in a way that many authors don't, and I love hearing about that. Maybe we should do a little intro to Neverness. It is indeed my favorite book. David won the Writers of the Future Award, I believe, in 1985 for a short story called Shanidar, and then was given a contract to write his very first book. And the result was Neverness, which came out in 88. And it is an absolutely unique work. And those who love it a lot. It is far future science fiction. I would categorize it almost as sort of science fantasy. You know, it's sort of like Dune in that sense. It's so far in the future with technology so advanced that it's almost like a fantasy novel. And it's just so incredibly imaginative. There's so much in Neverness and in the universe that you built, David. And it's so poetic, and it's so effusive, and it's so philosophical and spiritual that I've read it many times, and in fact, it's given me some wisdom to help me through some hard moments in my life. And in fact, both Neverness and the rest of the Requiem for Homo Sapiens, and now the Remembrancer's Tale, all deal with some pretty intense, some heavy issues. You talk about death a lot. You know, you sort of, it's not that you talk about it, but you delve into the theme of death, and especially in the Remembrancer's Tale, you know, it's like a meditation on memory and loss of love. Which I think is, everybody, if they haven't gone through it in life yet, they will at some point. So maybe I just want to jump right into the heart of the matter, David. Can you tell us why you zoomed in on this theme for this book, and maybe tell us why you wrote it after so long away from the Neverness universe?
Yeah, those are really good questions. Thanks, Marty, and thanks for your praise. It's a little embarrassing, but I do appreciate it. Of course, writers live on that. So, yeah, well, just going back, because as you say, it's been a long arc from when I started writing Neverness in 1985. So that's 30 plus 35 years, and that's been a very long arc. So when I finished the Requiem trilogy, I pretty much thought I was done with everything. It was a big. We had exploding stars, and that was going to affect this galactic civilization, or did affect it. And there was a big climactic battle between various forces. And I thought, well, this is pretty much done. Also, where I left things, I don't want to give too much away, but let's just say at the end of those books, the future course for human evolution and evolution in the cosmos was pretty much hinted at very strongly. And I thought, I can't really go any farther with that because I'm unevolved, a very unevolved man. And so to literally imagine what the next phase of human evolution would look like, and I don't mean technological evolution, because there's only so far I could go with that, right? Exploding stars and nanotechnology and literally a goddess's, the solid state entity's goddess ability to literally bring somebody to life and imbue that person with memories. That's all those concepts seem to take the technology about as far as I could. And so I want to do something at the end of the Requiem books that was more on a, personal, ontogenetic, if you will, basis for evolution of, just how would the human organism unfold its own evolution next. And I think I hinted at that very strongly, and I just thought, I can't take this any further. I've had this big cosmic battle and then that, and so it's like, what else could I do? So I thought I was done. So then at that time I wrote the E-Cycle, and just pure fantasy. Okay, that's what happens with science fiction when it gets a little too far out there, as you say, not too far out there, but when it gets far out there, it does tend towards fantasy. Dune does, my books do, many books do. And so I wrote that fantasy, and I thought, well, there's just this one story in the Neverness universe that I always wanted to tell, and was the story of Thomas Rain and how he tries to use his fantastic memory literally to recreate a love that he's lost. And in the process of doing that, I realized maybe I do want to try to talk about the next phase of human evolution. And so that actually begins in that book with the Asta Saluna, the star children who are representing the next step in human evolution. And I don't go too deeply into it in that book. Again, it's sort of only hinted at, but it's a little bit more fleshed out. And so I'm seeing now that the Remembrancer's Tale is going to be a transitional book to a whole new series of Neverness novels. And I didn't really want that to happen, but it just sort of happened. So now I feel in my, this ripe age of mine, tasked with writing many more novels. I have at least 3 in mind. There might be more.
What are they?
Very exciting.
Whose tale is next?
Whose tale is next? The Scryer's Tale.
The Scryer's Tale. Cool.
Wow. Now, for readers just being introduced to your work, David, should they be starting with Neverness? Should they move through the order you wrote them? Can a new reader jump into Remembrancer's Tale? Is knowing Thomas Rain essential to reading that book from Neverness, or where should they jump in?
Ever wondered what it takes to make it in the movie business? Peel back the curtain with 4-6 Success Filmmaking. 4-6 Success Filmmaking is where filmmakers share their stories and the secrets.
It's beyond competitive out there.
There have been movies that it's taken me 10 years to get made.
Don't wait to create. Like, you've got to just keep making stuff.
Tune in to 4-6 Success Filmmaking for your dose of cinematic realness, direct from the voices that have lived it.
Good questions, Tristan. I mean, I think it's always good to begin a series at the beginning, and I don't know if you consider this a just extended series, or now I have 2 series, but, I think it's always good to begin at the beginning. But a lot of people won't want to do that. The Requiem books are, of course, long and very involved, and, it's a lot to get through. So when I wrote Remembrancer's Tale, I very much had in mind that this novel should be accessible to anybody who hasn't read all the other books. Thomas Rain in the other books does play a role, so very much so in The Broken God, which is part of Requiem for Homo Sapiens. He is instrumental through his administration of the Remembrancer's drug Kava, of these remembrancing ceremonies in which human beings are sort of ultimately activating parts of the genome that are like a sleeping god, something that's going to, shape human evolution or drive human evolution. So he plays a part in that, but he's not a major character in those books. So with the Remembrancer's Tale, I feel like any reader could come to him anew and come to the universe anew and know what's going on. Marty, you've read the book, and what was your experience? I know you've read the other books and can't get them out of your mind, but were you able to go, oh yeah, this makes sense on its own?
Yeah. Well, I would say you do a very good job in the Remembrancer's Tale of sort of giving us some background of what happened in The Broken God and in Neverness. But I would say, I mean, as my experience as a reader would be that reading Neverness would be great first, because that really puts you in the world, and you do so much world building in that that you then already know and love these characters, and I think you don't need to read all of the Requiem for Homo Sapiens to know what's going on in Remembrancer's Tale, but I would recommend reading Neverness first and then jumping into that. Yeah, actually, since you mentioned the Asta Seluna, is that it? Asta Seluna, yeah, the sort of children of the stars, the next phase of human evolution. I have a quote that I would love to read, just to give people a flavor of your writing. He went on to say that the whole of the galaxy was alive and had a type of mind transcending and yet including all the separate minds and memories of those such as Rain, Bardo, Chandra, and everyone else. Bina, because she had been blind, had needed to develop a deeper sense in order to speak the children's eye talk, or rather the soul talk, as Sanjay called it. It is really a simple thing, sir, Sanjay said, though I don't fully understand it yet myself. We read letters inscribed on paper to make out words. We kithe ideoplasts instantiated in our minds to understand our theorems and complexes of ideas, and we quench through memories emblazoned in our souls to speak the language of the universe. So I love that. That I think just gives a great flavor of your writing, and you create this vocabulary, you create new words without having to thoroughly define them, but throughout Neverness and in your whole universe. That's part of what I love about it, is you just have this language that you've sort of made sound and used just right to give us these ideas of quenching and kithing and and ideoplasts and things that people can just kind of get an intuition of what you're talking about. So I love that little passage.
Yeah, and thank you. I work pretty hard on new words. So I guess then there's a question too, why new words at all? I feel like a new concept that might be a little bit nebulous or hard to pin down really works well with a new word rather than just a paraphrase of old words. And I would work really hard. I mean, Gene Wolfe, in his great books, had lots of words, lots of new words, and that inspired me. I thought, okay, he does this great. He'll probably be the all-time master of that. I'm going to be imitating this, but an imitation of something great is, not a small thing. So he inspired me, and then I would go to dictionaries. Not dictionaries, my big dictionary, which is, this Webster's is so huge. It comes in 3 parts, and I can hardly lift one of them. And I would just read the dictionary. I would just scan for obscure words, and some of them made it into my books, and some of them, like Quenge, I don't know how that came about, but that sort of just came to me.
I was going to ask about that one, because that reminds me of grokking from Heinlein, right? It's this perfect word that just kind of, you need that word to be able to say what you want to say.
Grokking was so perfect, I thought, I want to use that word. Everyone now knows what it means, but that's a little bit dicey to do that, because then I'm borrowing from someone else's universe.
Yeah.
And then there was a question of, well, if that's now a common word in our universe, here on planet Earth in 2023, can I use it? Because I'm not really borrowing it from another universe. It's now, common coin, as it were.
Right.
So I don't know about that one. But.
Right. Well, you use quenging a lot in the book that you released before this in 2017, I believe, was The Idiot Gods, which might have a different title too. I see now it's The Orca's Song, or maybe it's been published in 2 different things. So you use quenging a lot there, where these orcas quenge to basically. Well, I don't know. Why don't you tell us a bit about that?
The Idiot Gods was my original title, and I thought, that worked very well. But then as I started talking to my British publisher about it, I was going, well, maybe my British publisher's suggestion of The Orca's Song is just more friendly. It's more obvious what the book would be about. I liked Idiot Gods, the idea of human beings. Look, we have these godly powers as far as whales are concerned, but we're also idiots. What have we done with these godly powers? Some of us lead these absolutely debased and hard, miserable lives, on land. And so they call us Idiot Gods. So I thought that was kind of catchy, edgy type of title. But then the more I thought about it, for publication in the United States, I thought maybe Orca's Song was better. So that's why, those 2 titles exist. Quenging, in the preface to The Idiot Gods or The Orca's Song, I, kind of give a whole introduction hinting around what quenging is. And it's one of those words that I would say you can't really pin down. And it's like, God, how would you define God? How would you define mysticism? How would you define spirituality? I mean, those are kind of general words, and to many people, they mean many different things. But, sometimes if we talk about, oh, well, we had a spiritual experience, that's maybe the best that we can describe various experiences that might be called, mystical traditionally. But some people have spiritual experiences, and they say, oh, I had a spiritual experience at the football game, right? Because, I got in the middle of, 100,000 people, and I felt part of something bigger. So quenging is a lot of things. It is that certainly mystical sense, mystical prowess, if you will. It's also a literal ability to travel through space. Not literally, but I sort of leave some question about that. When you quenge, can you literally quenge to another star, or is that just a sense of like what's the right word in traditional having a mind blank when you can project your sight elsewhere and view something in a different place. That has a
astral projection. Is that astral
Well,
projection? Is that what you're thinking of, or
that's
maybe?
one of them, but that's more like you're on a different plane. This would just be like, if I close my eyes right now, I could be in your room, right, and see. I don't know if you call that astral projection because it's still this same physical level.
Right, right. Remote viewing,
clairvoyance, maybe, but
clairvoyance.
there's another. Anyway, it doesn't matter. That would be part of quenching. This ability to look elsewhere. It's also a connection with your own soul. So, quenching is one of these catch-all terms, and the whales themselves, who picked that word out, they sort of like created, because the whales, of course, don't have a language that's anything like English or anything like our languages. The protagonist of Idiot Gods, Arjuna, more or less created that word to represent something to human beings that was this whale thing that human beings really don't know about. And so it's kind of a catch-all term for a whole medley of whale capabilities, some of which we share. I believe that all beings share the same spiritual nature, if you will. But there are whale aspects to the way they experience reality. They're just utterly different than ours. For instance, I don't know if you knew this, but whales sleep one half of their brain at a time.
Oh.
Whale breathing is under their conscious control. Ours is too, half the time. Most of the time, we could just say, okay, I'm going to slow my breathing or speed my breathing up, and then a lot of times, even though it could be under our conscious control, we're not thinking about our breath. With whales, that is not true. They can't just breathe automatically because if they're underwater, they'll just breathe water and drown. And so they have to breathe consciously pretty much with every breath, just like, it's just sort of like if I pick up this teacup, then, that's going to be a conscious thing. Even though I might not be thinking about it, it's still under my conscious control. So with whales, their breathing has to be like that. It has to be something they will themselves to do. And so that necessitates their being awake in some part of their brain all the time. And so that's why they sleep with one half of their brain. And then,
wow, that's amazing.
Sometimes both halves are awake. And I think I riffed on that in Neverness with one of my alien species that have, quarter brains. And I think I said something in that book that's rare, that, these beings could be awake in all the quarters of their brains at the same time, or something like that. And so, partakes of all that. It's a sense of being awake as well. It's like being fully awake.
So would you say you quench, or you're quenching when you put the pen to paper or your hands to the keyboard? Is that an active thing that you do as a writer?
That's a great question, Tristan. Thanks. Something happens that's not a normal state for me. And, I wrote the last books in longhand. And so, I love sitting down with a piece of paper and a fountain pen and just writing things out. It's a very tactile experience, but somehow it's a very quiet experience too. It's quieter than, for me, than, clacking away at a keyboard and looking at a screen. So something happens when I write, whether it's, on a screen or on a piece of paper. So something happens that's very different. Yeah, that would be part of quenching. Not just because I'm in a state of creation, but because I'm also telling a story. So quenching is very related to telling stories. I would say that, not to give too much away about my whale book, but Arjuna, because he's horribly treated by human beings and hates them, loses his ability to quench. And for a whale, that's just like, I don't know, like a bird losing its ability to perceive colors. and so, life just isn't really meaningful for him if he can't quench. And I sort of feel the same way about writing. It's just like, yeah, that's what I do. That's what I came to Earth to do. Or not came to Earth. That's just because people don't come to Earth. They come out of the Earth, and that's just what I was meant to do, and that's what makes me happiest. So, long answer to your question, meaning yes. It's like quenching for me.
That's a beautiful answer.
I also just remembered that maybe I misspoke when I said that the Remembrancer's Tale is the first installation in the Neverness universe, because the Orcus song is also somewhat connected to the Neverness universe, because the whales quench to Agathange. Is that right? There was a mention of Agathange in there, and so I thought, oh, wow, this is great. It's like a side story on Earth.
I do mention Orcus in Neverness, where when Mally goes to Agathange and
Right.
gets some healing, as it were, and so somehow I'm like tying all everything together, maybe not in a hugely unified way, but Agathange represents this kind of like, I don't know, ideal heaven type of planet, but sort of not, because there's the history of Agathange in the Neverness universe. It is essentially people that carped their human forms into the forms of aquatic creatures, and so that's certainly no heaven, but it's represented in some ways as this ideal where people can go to be healed. So that would apply to both the universes.
Yeah. Well, maybe we can go back to talk a little bit more about the Remembrancer's Tale. I have a couple other quotes I want to read here. Again, to give our readers, our listeners, a flavor of your writing and also the subject matter. So here you talk a lot about memory, and not just as a person might experience memories, but as something deeper and somehow possibly fundamental to the universe, like space or time or energy. So here's something you say in the Remembrancer's Tale. Some of Rain's fellow academicians spoke of memory as an outfolding of explicit representations of a deeper, implicate order. A man's memory, according to others, was only part of a universal hologram, formed as the universe evolved and recorded all events occurring in space-time. Many remembrancers believed, more simply, that matter was in some deep sense nothing but pure memory, and that the meaning of evolution was to be found in the way that the primordial particles of matter generated out of the universe's fiery explosion into being had learned over billions of years how to assemble themselves into progressively higher and more complex states. The more mystical of Rain's brethren thus viewed reality as matter's remembering the fundamental purpose with which it had been imbued. Amazing. I love that. I'm a physicist, so I hear lots of stuff about quantum mechanics and all that sort of thing, but I've never heard anybody sort of contemplate and imagine, something like memory being woven into the fundamental structure of the universe. Where did you come up with that? Is this something you've been thinking about a long time, or have you read other people contemplating this kind of notion?
Yeah, good questions. Kind of deep and complex questions. I have been thinking about it for a long time. Asking myself, what is memory? What is consciousness? And we talk about RAM, ROM, read-only memory on our computers, but those memories don't seem to be anything like the way our memories work. Yeah, and as far as I can tell, no one really has any idea how our memories work. There do not appear to be engrams in the human brain that record individual memories the same way that bytes of computer space do. So then what is it? How does it relate to consciousness? I think we've seen movies where people are amnesic and lose their memories. If you can imagine right now, just like closing your eyes, and when you open them, you have absolutely zero memory of what happened in your life or who you are. Wouldn't that entail some sort of loss of consciousness? I mean, there has to be some kind of relation between the two. So there was always that piece. And then the question of what is memory would lead into the question of what is consciousness. Well, that's an even bigger can of worms that a lot of people don't really want to open. And it's like one of the major, maybe criticisms of science right now, that science as it's constituted of being this, reductive materialistic system can't really explain what memory is, or consciousness is rather, either actually right now. And so a lot of people think it's going to happen. All we have to do is get sophisticated enough in our brain models to do that. But a lot of people think that the whole approach is just all wrong, that we really don't understand something fundamental about the universe. Idealists such as Bernardo Kastrup, of course, are viewing things just the opposite. They're saying, well, no, mind is fundamental, mind and consciousness are fundamental, and out of that comes the material universe. And that's been an argument that just goes way, way back. I think Plato might have made it, but certainly philosophers such as
Bishop Berkeley.
Berkeley, yes.
Berkeley, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes, he's.
I refute him thus. Thump. Anyway.
Right. So that's all played in. So I've been thinking about these things for just a long, long time. As far as memory goes, we could look at it as something like, it just emerges. Matter gets complicated enough, it just emerges. But it seems to me, and I am not as up on this as I would like to be, but a lot of people are just physicists and thermodynamicists and informational scientists, people who deal with sciences of complexity. They're just coming up with literally a new paradigm for the way that we are going to view the universe, which is just not this, random bits of dead matter suddenly colliding, coming together by this fantastic chance that probably only happened once in the universe at one time in history here on Earth, and boom, we have life. And maybe that's the only life in the cosmos. And then somehow this life became complex, and somehow mind emerged from all that. And, that's like the materialist way of looking at everything, and that seems to be just totally inadequate to explain everything. And I have felt that for years. I mean, my thinking on that, my feelings on that just go back, I don't know, 40 or 50 years possibly, because it just didn't seem possible. The probabilities are all against it. And that's one reason why some people think that, it could have only happened on Earth because the chance is just too small. So the newer view, which, I've been playing with for a long time, and actually I'm presently reading a book that I can recommend to anyone. I'll hold it up to you in case you haven't seen this. Romance of Reality.
Cool. I don't know it.
That one. What if our cosmic purpose is to create our own cosmic purpose? This book will blow your mind. Well, it sounds like one of those woo-woo books, but it's really not. It goes into detailed explanation of thermodynamics, second law of thermodynamics, and how, given all the science of that, then life would be inevitable. Consciousness would be inevitable. Increase of intelligence, increase of consciousness would be inevitable, rather than just this chance thing that happens. It's and all according to well-established scientific laws. What are we as organisms? We are organisms that are far from thermodynamic equilibrium. The only way we can stay at that state is to process energy. And when we do that, the argument of this book is it automatically creates higher states. It automatically creates information. And that's something that I've played with, an idea that I've played with in my books for a long time, is that, information is created. Well, then I don't remember when it was that some of the particle physicists, started thinking, well, okay, what is everything made of? And some of them say basically information. So this idea of memory being a key, an undergirding of all reality was certainly not new to me. I mean, I don't know what is new to me, if anything, maybe nothing. But that idea has been floating around for many years, that in some sense information is key. And that's a little bit different than saying, mind exists and mind creates reality, different than the idealists, than what the idealists do. But there is a sense that at its core, whatever existence is, whatever matter is something conscious, intelligent, some kind of information, some kind of memory, something like that. In the Remembrancer's tale, it was natural enough for me to talk about memory in that regard.
Do you think we're getting to the point of narrowing in on this? Is this something that we will all agree on, or is it always going to be kind of ambiguous?
As far as I can tell right now, there's a huge war going on between the reductionist materialist and the complexity scientists who say, no, the old approach of the Newtonian billiard ball universe, where little pieces of matter just randomly move and literally bump themselves into life, is really not the right way to look at the universe. And indeed, many of the materialists are forced into a position of saying, oh, well, consciousness, that would be an emergent property, but it's not really real. It's just like something that we think is real. And so philosophers like Dennett, Daniel Dennett, and others are just saying, well, this thing that we call consciousness, our most fundamental sense of who we are, is in some sense an epiphenomenon. So yeah, I think there was just many, many scientists who are moving in the opposite direction of just saying, no, that old model is completely inadequate. We need the science of complexity theory, thermodynamics, and all these other sciences to explain what's going on. Now, they say that. Will they ever actually be able to explain it? I don't know.
So what would you say memory, what is memory's role in information? How are they related? What's your interpretation of that, or your understanding of it?
I don't have a good understanding. I'm sorry to say, Tristan. I wish I could just, get on the other end of this interview and just, David Zindell has all the answers. I don't. Information is pretty much a well-established scientific concept. As far as I could tell, was the modern articulation of that was invented by Claude Shannon, who founded cybernetics. And so that's a well-defined scientific thing. Here's what information is. How does that relate to memory? I don't know.
Well, I'll also add one thing. In grad school, I read a classic paper. This war that you're talking about between reductionism and complexity, David, has been going on since at least the 60s and 70s. So there's a famous paper called More is Different. It's by Paul Anderson, who's a very well-established and successful scientist. And he simply points out that, more is, that there isn't, just because something is small doesn't make it more fundamental. Temperature, right, is fundamental. Temperature is an absolutely fundamental physical notion, and yet it doesn't make sense. It's completely meaningless at the level of a single particle. Okay, temperature is an emergent property, just like you said about consciousness or memory. There are emergent properties in the universe that are no less fundamental than, position or velocity or something like that. You can't do statistical mechanics or thermodynamics or much of physics if you can't make fundamental notions about emergent properties like temperature, like color. they're no less fundamental for being made up fundamentally of many things working together. So anyway, I think it's a debate that's been going a long time, and I find it really fascinating to link this and to now think physically about not just information but memory, as you say. And it's not that this idealism, this philosophical position, is not that a human brain creates the external reality. I've always interpreted that it's a very sort of mystical, pantheistic kind of idea that the universe itself is the mind of God, right? It is the processing of information in the universe is what it means for the universe to think, and or to imagine or to remember. And I think that's a pretty valuable spiritual, philosophical position.
Yeah, I think that's a great statement. And to get back to your earlier question of I think the quote you read from my book was about the relation of individual memory to universal memory, if there is any, if universal memory does exist. And of course, that's a very, very old notion. I mean, in my Neverness universe, the Akashics, that's one of the things that they study. And that's a word that comes from Sanskrit, I believe. The Akasha was this, essentially universal memory. There's the Akashic records. Everything that's ever happened is somehow recorded in these Akashic records, which exist where? I mean, they don't exist anywhere in space and time. And I'm sure authors like Borges, riffed on that with his, infinite library. So what do I think about that? I think, what would be the point? And this is, a kind of a woo-woo approach to things, I can't validate this other than saying, what's the point to life if we all just die anyway? Okay, well, what's the point of having all these experiences if they're just all lost?
Yeah.
Do you remember that great scene at the end of Blade Runner where the android, what's his name? Rutger Hauer, that's his human name. I forget his name in the movie.
Roy Batty.
Roy, that's right. So he's his time's up, right? He's about to die, and he talks about some of his memories, and it's all going to be lost in time, like tears in the rain. I just think that was a beautiful line, and I think it was something that he outlived, by the way. I don't think that was in the script. I sort of have a memory of reading that, but it's like everything he's ever been is just going to be lost like tears in the rain. And that just seems to me, on an emotional level, just unacceptable. And so, I can't argue why individual memory should be part of a greater universal holographic memory, but it just doesn't seem like a good way to have a universe.
Well, I do find myself closer to any sort of interpretation of what spiritualism would be when I experience art, when I hear beautiful music, when I read beautiful words, and I wonder what correlation that has to memory and consciousness, for that matter. If other humans and our expression are what help us get closer to understanding what memory and consciousness, and possibly some sort of eternal memory could possibly be.
That might be a really great statement about what art really is or should do ideally.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, the ancient Greeks said that truth is beauty, right? And beauty is truth. And so there might be some connection there, that what we experience as beauty is somehow akin to the same, to a physical truth, or to a universe expressing itself, truly. I don't know. It's an old notion.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Marty, because I feel like it's a notion that's really critical to all my books. So sometime during the writing and then aftermath of writing Neverness, a critic actually kind of took me to task, named John Clute, one of the great critics of the science fiction field. And he said, well, basically he really likes his novel, but there's some, claptrap about programs that run the human mind, and these essential programs can be downloaded, and that gets to the whole business of not download, uploaded into computers, and somehow we can just project our beings into machines. And that's been going on in science fiction for a long time. And so I was at some point faced with a choice. Well, do I want to roll in that direction? And the more I thought about it, the more I thought, no. Did I have a good scientific reason for it? There's a lot in my books that is not dismissive of AI, but really kind of placing AI in a category of other. Like maybe this is some kind of intelligence without consciousness. And so I realized, eventually I came to a conscious decision. How do I want to deal with AI? How do I want to deal with this, billiard ball universe in which everything is dead unless somehow life magically happens? And I realized that, getting back to Marty's statement about art and what Tristan said about art too, I rejected it for my own novels, not because I think it's not scientifically possible. Maybe everything is all dead. Maybe our memories just disappear after we die, or after we think them, our thoughts just disappear. Maybe it's all meaningless. Maybe there's no direction to the universe. Maybe artificial intelligence will replace it. So I rejected that, not so much out of scientific principle, but just out of aesthetic principle. It's just ugly. So this idea of a whole universe that comes alive, that drives its own evolution, that is infinitely various and beautiful and new, and that's just more appealing to me, and seem to have more possibilities from a literary.
It's so beautiful, it must be true, right? Or it's so beautiful, it should be true.
Yeah. I've recently read accounts of scientists or mathematicians who can get a bit carried away with that. It's like, here's this new equation for string theory. That's so beautiful, it must be true. That idea, and of course that's been true many times in the past. Something that is beautiful was true, and something that was true is beautiful. But that was my basic motivation. To create beauty for myself. I mean, that's part of when I sit down and write. I don't want to just sit and write about ugly things. I mean, there's plenty of people who do that, right? Dystopias and horror stories and presumably very personal tales of just everything's horrible and my life is horrible, and I didn't want to do that ever.
Something that kind of relates to what we're talking about is another short story that I have here, and it's a bit of a treat. Marty, I don't think you've read this, so I'm going to pass this along. When the Rose is Dead. And I did read this a long time ago, and it has very similar themes to what we're discussing right now. This is the saddest story I know, is the opening line, and it's just, it's gorgeous. And I think, David, you just touched up on some of the themes from that story as well. So this is just something that's close to your heart, memory, telling stories, and beginning and end. It's you really give us a lot to think about. You're a modern day philosopher.
Well, I don't know about that, but I'm glad you mentioned that, because I haven't thought about that story in years. And now that you say it, I was probably very concerned about memory at that point, because that was a story about a person's who actually, well, I'm not going to give too much away, but again, that's memory plays a huge part of that story. Actually underpins the whole story. So, that was going on when I was writing Neverness, and I think I wrote that story a little bit after Neverness, as I remember. But yeah, memory does always haunt me.
Yeah. I actually have read that story. It's in your collection called Shanidar. So I know I bought your short story collection off of your webpage, which has the original short story that gave rise to Neverness called Shanidar, but it also has that story and a few others that really stick in my mind about the tiger. Actually, I noticed you put the tiger story. I can't remember the name of it, but it's in the Remembrancer's Tale. Yes, you sort of cycled part of it into in there. I noticed with being eaten by the tiger.
Yeah. So that's true. And I'd had that story in my mind to write for a long time. I just had this
Yeah.
image of this kind of like magical tiger that walks into this public square with a lot of people, and what's the mystery of the tiger? And of course, everything came from the Blake poem, Tiger, Tiger, burning bright in the forest of the night. So everything came from that, and that poem I've quoted all through my books. It was quoted in Neverness, and I'm sure I must have quoted somewhere in the Remembrancer's Tale. I don't remember right now, but so I just had that image in my mind, and then a story grew around it, and so yeah, I guess you could say I don't think any of the prose was duplicated. I think just the idea was duplicated, as I remember. But,
Yeah, I think so.
yeah.
So you talk about meeting Timothy Leary in a bar, and your long conversation with him. Probably, I don't know if this was in the 70s, maybe the 80s, maybe the 60s, 80s. Yeah.
80s. It was 80s after I published Neverness. So I want to say,
Oh, right. Yeah.
and we could look this up, but I want to say 88 or 89, probably 89. It was at the World Science Fiction Convention in Chicago. So Leary's did always read science fiction, and in a sense, some of his ideas are just very science fictional. And so he was at the convention for reasons of his own. Maybe he's just a geeky fan at heart, like anybody else. But I met him in a bar, and I said that I've read your books and you've been very influential, and I told him who I was. He had read Neverness, and we just had our conversation. And by the way, for anyone that does read this is not a literal transcription. This is my recreation, my memory of the conversation, because I couldn't, remember back 15 years word for word. But yeah, he's a fascinating guy, right?
Yeah. Well, and you guys thought a lot about the same things. I mean, which really kind of came as a revelation to me, and it also really spoke to me about how early you had thought of a lot of these things about artificial intelligence and consciousness and computers, and a lot of this. You were one of the early, certainly. You were thinking and writing about these things that have now become kind of common topics, I think, in science fiction in a way they weren't before. I'll read a little bit here from Splendor. He laughed at this and said, "But you wrote about it in Neverness. Cyberspace, the interface with computers the size of moons, the interface with your light ships, ideoplasts, the number storm, slow time and quick time, the computer-generated cosmic consciousness of the manifold. Pretty cool stuff." Anyway, if I don't know if that's a quote from him or your recollection, but that must have been quite something to hear from Timothy Leary. That you had such you had so much to say so early on about these topics.
Yeah, I was really impressed that he not only read my book, of course, but that he remembered a lot of it. I mean, that's like, wow, And I don't want to say Timothy Leary was my hero or idol or anything like that, but he made a huge impression on me. He was at the forefront of a consciousness revolution, for good and for bad. I mean, there were some things that he did that I don't really admire. Was it good for him just to encourage hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people just to turn on with psychoactive drugs? And I don't have an answer to that one. It changed society. It changed many, 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 many people. But he was hugely influential. He has a model for the unfolding of human evolution. It's eightfold model of circuits in the human brain, and that was a big thing for me. I didn't necessarily think that model was just really representative, but just the fact that people were thinking about that and trying to imagine these higher potentials. This neurogenetic level that we're accessing our DNA, and then there's, and I might be getting these wrong because it's been a while since I looked at all these, but then there's a level where we're accessing our DNA, and it's just like, these are great ideas. His ideas were science fictional. He easily, and he might have written a science fiction novel, I don't remember, but he easily, his heart was with science fiction as much as anybody I've ever known. And his thoughts were, he thought, when the internet came along, he said, oh, this is going to be, electronic LSD. Well, it is, and it wasn't. But he was enthused about that. And then he was enthused about, migrating into space. He had a little, he was always big with slogans, right? So his was SMILE. So that was S, space, M, space migration, intelligence, increase, life extension. And that was all going to happen in these like L5, colonies orbiting Earth as a start. And so he was just very, very big on all that after his psychedelic period. And so he was just a fountain of ideas for me.
Yeah.
And an inspiration too. I mean, he like moved a lot of people in our societies. Like his consciousness got dialed in, and then a lot of people's lives were affected because of that. Well, I didn't want to, push psychedelic drugs, but I thought, okay, I can write these really cool things in novels and, reach people that way.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I would like to know of other inspirations that are kind of at the other end of the spectrum, David, more nature-driven and from the past, like The Quest for Fire, which was a film from 1981, or the work of Jean Ohl. Am I saying that right? Jean Ohl, who did Clan of the Cave Bear.
Right.
Were those of inspiration to read? Because for those that are going to read some of David's work, there's a lot of writing of Neanderthal-like humans, and it's a beautiful contrast to the technology of the distant future that we see. And I'm just wondering what inspiration comes from nature and those works.
Yeah, great question. Very insightful, Tristan, because I feel like nature has always been hugely important to me. Starting as a kid, I would go out. Our little development in Toledo, Ohio, our lawn literally abutted a forest, and so I used to just go out the back door into the woods, and I just remember having these great, for a better word, mystical experiences out in the trees, and so I just loved being out there. I was out there for hours, I climbed these trees that were just way too tall for a 5 or 6 year old to climb, and I suppose that's where I just started my just this idea that nature is great, and things like classrooms, cars, pollution aren't so great. I think to some extent in my books there's some kind of idealization of nature, and maybe not, because the Debaki tribe, the Alloy, there's some stuff going on with them that's less than ideal, less than peaceful and enlightened. But again, this is what I referred to last time, or a few minutes ago, when we talked about aesthetic ideals. There's something always been utterly unaesthetically appealing to me about, for instance, living in a space colony, right? It's like, this one model would be a huge cylinder that would, rotate. Another would be a wheel. And essentially what they are is shopping malls in space. And I just, had a horror of all that aesthetically, and have a horror of our big cities, and even more so of our suburbs. And so in a lot of my books, I think there's this yearning to get back to nature, if nature's get backable. In some sense, everything is natural. Cities are a natural outgrowth of human capabilities and culture, but in another sense, there's something that we've really lost by living in cities. And I live in a city. I live in Denver, and there's times where I just want a cabin on the beach. that cabin that I wrote about in the wild, that's my ideal cabin off the coast of Oregon, and that's kind of where I want to be, in that type of situation. So, yeah, I know that was a long-winded answer to the question. I hope that made some sense.
And no, it does for sure. Yeah. Marty, do you have more questions? And then also, David, is there anything you'd like to talk about that we haven't asked you?
That's a good question. Just to get back to what I mentioned earlier about these additional books that I'm writing now, or thinking about writing now, there's a Squire's Tale, and then there's Timekeeper's Tale, and then there's Haikuist Tale, and so there's just all these books that I really want to write and feel like, first of all, am I too old to write them? And then second of all, will I have time to write them? Because it's just this huge project, and it just happened. I never, sought it out. It just suddenly realized I want to tell in detail, not just hint at, this idea of the whole universe waking up to a higher state of consciousness and intelligence. I feel like I've dealt with that to some extent in my books, but my, task, what I want to do for the rest of my life, is just to do that in a way that would just be, just like blow people's minds, just like be overwhelming. And it's not just, not just the ideas, but just in terms of, how this would appeal emotionally. And I think I'm very much consciously involved with this notion of, no, I mean, we could have this utterly, unbelievably barely imaginable, but wonderful future. And there's so much on our planet these days that's saying just the opposite. Our politics are just, crazy right now, and people are losing hope that we're ever going to have a government that could actually respond to people's real needs and real problems, or planetary problems such as global warming. Nuclear weapons persist, and we're just as capable of blowing ourselves up 10 minutes from now as we were 40 years ago. And there's new threat of AI. Just within the past month, I think everyone's now talking about Chat GPT, and is it going to just totally trash the careers of cover artists, right? Because you can just type into Chat GPT, or DALL-E is, like its companion program. Okay, here's what I want. I want penguins, dancing on icebergs, floating in Lake Erie, or whatever. So there's a sense of that. It's like, okay, AI is now this huge threat, and so, and then we have these people who are these public figures who are in control of what's going on, and they seem to be not just stupid but insane. And so I feel like there's just this sense of doom across our planet, like we're going to have a horrible future. And I guess I want to write something that would say no. We don't exist in this mechanistic trap of our own making, where Earth is going to be defiled and everybody's just going to die and civilization is going to crash. No, what lies before us is so unimaginably beautiful and splendid that it would just, take your breath away. So that would be what I would want to say, is that's where all this is headed. And it came out of nowhere. I thought it was done with this series, but I feel like life, or the gods of fiction, or whoever, had other plans.
Well, that's fantastic. Thank God for David Zindell giving us some hope for the future. Yeah. We just we talked to Kim Stanley Robinson last week, and about his latest book, The Ministry for the Future. I don't know if you've seen it or heard of it, but it is also, a guy like Kim Stanley Robinson, he's been writing about climate change and sort of climate fiction for decades and decades. And it was amazing to talk to him, because he, with the Ministry for the Future, it's kind of a message of hope. It's putting all the things together that we could do to fix the problems, and at the end of the day coming out. And, it was neat hearing him, who's been an activist and has been, right in the muck of all the problems, the environmental and climate problems, and been banging on doors and yelling at people for it for his entire career. And now he feels heard. He sort of said, it's really great. People are listening now. It's the first time something's changed. And I'm glad to hear. I mean, I just want more of that. I think the world needs that kind of message, and needs to have some sort of hope, some sort of sight line through to the future, that we can actually come out the other side of this and things can get better.
Yeah, Stan is great. I corresponded with him actually because one of my not so much concern for the Neverness universe and future, but for the here and now is, could we create a civilization right now that is sustaining and non-polluting? In other words, a lot of the stuff that we're doing right now we do through computers. Our call right now is being done through computers, and of course, there's that entails the employment of microchips, and then microchips have to be manufactured. Is there any way to do that so we're not creating this horrible, pollution and waste? And can we have a technological civilization that is sustainable? And so, one of my questions to him, because I regarded him as like the go-to guy. I mean, I don't know anyone who's smarter or more knowledgeable about all this than he is. And so my question was, okay, who is writing on this? And so he gave me a list of some people that were doing these writings, and I feel like they were invaluable for my thinking about all that. Not that that's going into my new novels, but just in terms of it's going into my present sense of what can we do right now. So I'm glad you mentioned him, because he's just among the absolute best writers out there.
Thanks, David. I can't wait to read the Scryer's Tale, and then the Timekeeper's Tale.
Well, I do have the same feeling as when we talked a year and a half ago. As I've said, I'm more of a materialist in my thinking, and I always want there to be more. I think there's a lot of us that are, and I don't deny the truth that anyone has to share. But when you share what your understanding of truth in your art, and then when we've spoken to you a couple times now, David, you get me closer to understanding that there's a little more connectedness out there that we should be looking at, and I appreciate that very much. It makes me feel very warm, which makes me want to look deeper into what you share. So thank you for that, David.
Well, thanks, Tristan. And my feeling is, even if I'm wrong, even if people like me are wrong, it's just a nicer way to live.
Yeah, great. Well, thanks again, David. That's
Thank
a great note to end on.
Thank you for joining us once again. Next week, Sean Gunn is on the show. Sean is in Guardians of the Galaxy. He plays Greglin. He also is the motion capture for Rocket, the raccoon. He's also the brother of James Gunn, who makes all those movies, which is pretty awesome. So we're happy to have Sean on. Please join us for that one. Until next time.